After living here in Spain for the last 20 years, I think I'm in a pretty well placed position to be able to offer you the brutal truths of what it's really like living here in Spain compared to back in the UK. So, with no further ado, I'm going to go through all the pros and the cons that I personally have felt over the last 20 years, and I think maybe sharing them with you will give you a good insight. Okay, first up, let's talk about safety because this is a massive pro that Spain has. After the 20 years I've lived here, I can honestly say I've never really felt an occasion where I don't feel safe, whether that's walking home from being out late at night or going out alone or whatever it may be. It just doesn't feel risky. And interestingly enough, on the few occasions I have witnessed fights here in Spain, it has always been between Brits. Now, whether that's Brits here on holiday or whether it's Brits in heavily populated British expat areas, I'm not sure, but it's always been between Brits. Now, the Spanish, on the other hand, I've just never seen it. There just doesn't seem to be this culture of the tiniest little thing will upset them and that will spark into something bigger. You know, they're not here to create enemies. They're here to make friends and have a good time socially. So that is a massive cultural difference and one that I truly appreciate. Now, if I can compare that back to the UK, with phone snatchings, road rage, tense vibes everywhere I seem to go back in the UK. And many cities, and particularly I remember recent visit to a city called Peterborough. It just felt extremely edgy, both day and night. Lots of youngsters walking about wearing all these black tracksuits with balaclavas, and I don't know, Spain just doesn't have that culture. There certainly isn't this big man syndrome where people seem to feel that they have to prove how hard they are or any of that. It's a much more calm place where people's only priority is to get along and have a nice time. Okay, let's talk about lifestyle and materialistic culture because, again, this is another pro for Spain in my opinion. Life here undoubtedly feels infinitely richer on a normal income. Now, of course, there are exceptions. Places such as Marbella are very materialistic, and I think that's down to the culture that's been built there with such, wealthy expats moving there. But overall, there's far less materialism in Spain, whereas back in the UK, I always felt this constant pressure to drive the best car, wear the best designer brands, and there was just non-stop advertising telling you what you must have. Well, here, none of that matters. People care less about possessions or status symbols. It's calmer and a nicer, less pressured way to live. And after 20 years, I've got to be honest, I wouldn't want to trade that. Okay, another big pro for Spain is the community and the overall friendliness of people. Now, community is everywhere in Spain. It doesn't matter where I've lived, and I've lived in a lot of different areas over the 20 years, from the northwest of Spain to the southeast and now the south, all different areas. But community is very big. Neighbours will say hello, whereas I can remember living back in London when I was last living there, I used to walk out my flat front door at the same time as my neighbour every single morning. And in the 2 years I was living in that property, not once did my neighbour even acknowledge me. So that's a big cultural difference as well. Friendliness is everywhere. Shopkeepers here remember your name. And even in some of the bigger cities, there's more of a small town vibe. Now, where I live now, here in this small Spanish hillside village in rural Andalusia, we've gotten to know people fast, both within the expat community and with the locals. Neighbours stop and have a chat. We've already made some expat friends in the area which have helped us with, our new house in the last 3 months, giving us advice and pointing us in the right direction for things. So, again, this is a massive pro here in Spain and something that I haven't witnessed on the same scale in the UK. Now, the Spanish health system is undoubtedly a massive pro for Spain. Spain's healthcare system is simply excellent. Waiting times are minimal to a point in certain areas almost non-existent, and the care is incredible. Now I know this from personal experience because back in 2018 I was seriously ill to the point where it was touch and go on whether I would live or die, but the hospital care I received during that period was absolutely spectacular. Now, if I compare that to the stories I hear back in the UK, where family are often telling me that they're waiting weeks or months for appointments with doctors or surgery, Spain's system is on the opposite scale. It's very efficient, very compassionate, and it's truly reassuring. Now, no pro list for Spain would be complete without mentioning the weather. The weather here simply allows you to plan months ahead. Here in this part of Spain where I live, Andalusia, we get around 300 days a year of sunshine. So we're able to plan barbecues months and months ahead. Whereas back in the UK, every time I can remember we was either inviting people to come for a barbecue or we was going to theirs for a barbecue. 9 times out of 10 it was called off because of rain. But here you can reliably enjoy your weekends, your holidays and your outdoor activities without worrying about the sky. Another big pro for Spain is the cost of living. Now, don't get me wrong, the cost of living here has gone up a lot over the 20 years, but I still think it is cheaper than the UK. And one of the things that shocks me most when I go back to the UK is the prices to go out and socialise. I remember on my last visit, I met friends at the Lighterman, which is a pub slash bar at the back of King's Cross in Granary Square. 4 beers come to 45 quid. The same 4 beers here in Spain, €12. Typically as well, eating out is a lot cheaper. For example, down the road here, you can have an exceptional menu del dia, 3 courses for between 10 and €12. Now, of course, you can go to fancy areas and fancy restaurants in Marbella and pay a lot more. For example, me and my wife sometimes go to Marbella, and for a meal for the two of us with a bottle of wine can easily come to €250, €300. But overall, if you're staying out at the fancy places, socialising here is far more affordable. Pro number 7 for Spain is a massive thumbs up for me, and that is culture. Spain just hasn't lost its identity. Traditions are still alive, whether it's Spanish flags waving in the breeze, local fiestas, girls with the Spanish flag the Spanish flag painted on their face, wearing their Spanish costumes, whatever it may be, the culture is embedded in its people and they won't change that for anyone. And that gives Spain a very unique authenticity that I think has completely disappeared from the UK, unfortunately. When I think back to the UK when I was young, being born in the early 70s and growing up in the 80s, it had such a special feeling behind it in the UK. Everything felt magical, but unfortunately, none of that feeling exists there anymore, at least from my own personal opinion. And it's such a shame because Britain had so much to offer, it really did. But culturally, I just see it as in a massive decline. But Spain, I don't think the culture here will ever die. Okay, so there's just a few of the positives. Now, that list could continue for a lot longer, but I decided to leave it there. So we can now focus on the cons. Now, the biggest con for me after 20 years living abroad has to be missing family and friends. And this is by far the hardest part. Not being able to see my kids or my grandson regularly, or spending time with my brother or my cousin who happens to be my best friend back in the UK is extremely hard. And whenever I do go back, which is every few months, leaving is still hard after 20 years. And that's something that I don't think will ever change for me. Friends are the same. I've made some amazing friends here, but I still miss all my friends back in London. Phone calls and video calls are good, but it isn't the same as actually spending time together in person. And this is a big one for me because, yes, I'm an expat, but, I think coming from the UK, we have this culture of being very ambitious, and that's something that I've not really lost in its entirety. Now, back in the UK, it is full of opportunities to earn and grow a business. However, Spain, it is much harder. Entrepreneurship isn't part of the culture here, and the government's rules make it very tricky to even consider setting something up. Salaries are very low, with many Spanish often earning between 1,000 and 1,500 euros a month. And this is a massive con if you're used to the UK earning potential. Okay, let's talk about the property prices in Spain, because I'm going to be honest, this falls into the category of both a pro and a con. So, from a pro perspective, if you're a Northern European coming here, you've sold your property back in the UK, you're going to get a fantastic house for a fraction of the price of what you've sold for back in the UK, unless you're in, again, specific areas, for example, Marbella. However, there is also a con to this, because I'm looking at this from a local perspective. I class myself more of a local now. After 20 years, I think I have a right to. And a lot of my Spanish friends are extremely frustrated by how high the property prices are now, to the point where many of them simply can't afford to buy. An example of this is back in 2013, I was living in an area called Estepona. It's a very nice Andalusian town. And at the time, back in 2013, I would have said that prices there overall were pretty much very affordable. However, if we look now at those very same properties, they have skyrocketed to the point where they're actually out of reach, not just for the Spanish, but for most people. So there is a massive problem with the property prices in Spain. If you do travel inland, such as where I'm now living, there's very affordable housing, but this is definitely a problem, or a con, if you like, for Spain right now, and one that I think the government needs to get to grips with. Another con for me of living in Spain, and this one is very personal, but that is simply missing the buzz of London. I really miss London's vibe. I miss its energy. I miss the beat, the noise in the streets. I miss everything about that. And whenever my feet touch the ground back in London, it's the first thing I notice that we just don't have here in Spain. It doesn't matter where I've been living, whether I've been living in Santiago or Marbella, wherever it is, there's something uniquely special about the buzz of London, and that for me is a con, not just for Spain, but for anywhere in the world. Okay, another con for Spain is the weather, and I know you're thinking, but you had that as a pro, but it is also a con, and the reason I say that is that summers here can be brutal. For example, July and August, the heat is just so high. The outdoor activities during daylight are basically limited unless you're in the water. In the evenings, yes, it's very nice, but it can still be very, very hot. But this is a con. And I know myself, after 20 years here and after speaking to other expats that have been here for a long time, that if we were able to get away for the whole of July and August, we would actually really enjoy that. So this is also a con at times, the weather. Another con for Spain is second-hand car prices. They are crazy. And even after 20 years, it still drives me crazy now when I'm looking at car prices. Now, I've actually switched how I buy cars, and I won't buy second-hand cars anymore. I'll either buy new or I will buy nearly new, like demonstrators. And the reason I do that is because I find that they're much better value. But if you was to look at the price of a car in the UK that, say, is 10 grand, you could easily potentially double the value of it here. So that is a massive con for Spain as well. You know, I know we're going back to the materialism things, but I think if we're talking about normal everyday cars, which is what I'm talking about here, I think most people need a car. And in Spain, having a car is still classed almost as having a luxury as opposed to a necessity. So yeah, this is a big con for Spain, because the whole car market is just ridiculously expensive. Okay, another big con for Spain is the paperwork and the bureaucracy, because there is paperwork for absolutely everything. Whether you're setting up utilities, registering documents, even buying something involves some sort of paperwork normally, and is extremely frustrating and time consuming. Now, when I think about the simplicity of changing things in the UK, whether you're changing your driving license, whether you're changing the ownership of your car, whatever it may be, it just seems so simple compared to here. So if you are considering moving to Spain, patience is of the virtue when it comes to paperwork and bureaucracy, because without it, you will drive yourself insane. Another con for Spain has to be customer service. Now, coming from the UK where customer service is extremely important, that's something that I notice is lacking massively in Spain. Now, don't get me wrong, the Spanish overall can be very, very helpful, but I've come across scenario after scenario weekly where customer service is non-existent. I'll give you an example. My accountant, I've emailed my accountant, I've messaged my accountant and called my accountant probably around 7 times in the last 3 weeks. I'm yet to have any form of response, and this isn't an isolated incident. This is just how things happen here. You know, you'll eventually get a message back if you're lucky, and again, even after 20 years, it's something I just can't accept. Another example is, I remember 4 years ago I wanted to change my car, and I walked into a very well-known dealership here in the Marbella area. I took a car out for a test drive. We parked the car up, and I said to the salesman, okay, I'll buy it. I'll do a bank transfer and I'll buy it. I'm yet 4 years down the line still waiting for a call back from him to firm up that deal. Of course, I've bought a couple of other cars in that time frame, but again, there's no customer service. Now, if you walk into a car dealership in the UK and you want to do a deal, they're not going to let you out the dealership until you've shook hands and you've put a deposit down. Whereas here, life just moves so slow, and there's no urgency or customer service. So again, that is a big con for Spain compared to, say, the UK. So should you move to Spain? Well, the truth is, it really depends what you value. If it's sunshine, slower pace, community and good food, then Spain undoubtedly wins. But if you're going to miss your family, or you're going to miss that high salary, city buzz and the efficiency of the way things typically work in the UK, then you're definitely going to miss that. 20 years in, would I change my choice? Well, the truth is, I know paradise doesn't exist. You know, here isn't perfect, and nor is in the UK. But one of the things that I'm working towards, because it's something for me that I think will give me the best of both worlds, is to have a place here in Spain and a place in the UK. So, you know, just as I'm getting fed up with Spain, I can go to the UK, and after 3 or 4 months in the UK and getting fed up, I can come back to Spain. I think for me, that is the best of both worlds. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this vlog, please remember to give it a like. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It's absolutely free to do. Doesn't cost a penny, but it really helps this channel to grow. Also, I'm offering you guys a free ebook called Your First Steps in Spain, and this is a book that I've recently put together. And if you have recently moved to Spain, or you're considering it, it's really a 4-week plan for you to be able to go through to get yourself integrated, make sure you're registered correctly and all that other stuff. So if you want your free copy of that, send an email. I'll put my email address in the comments below. Bounce me an email there just saying that you want your free ebook, and I will email you back with it. Anyway, enjoy whatever you're doing for the rest of the day, and I'll catch you in the next one.